This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. My name's Jeff, and this week we're talking with writer, actor, director, producer, Josh Ruben. Josh Ruben is a multi-hyphenate Renaissance man with more triple threats than you can shake a stick at. He came up performing sketch comedy with UCB and was a founding member of College Humor Originals. He has directed sketches for The Late Late Show with James Corden and Adam Ruins Everything, and he directed and appeared in Funny or Die's narrative podcast, The Last Degree of Kevin Bacon for Spotify. He wrote, directed, and starred in Scare Me with Aya Cash and Chris Redd, which earned him the director's gig for Werewolves Within. Most recently, he produced and appeared in Noah Segan's Blood Relative and starred in Travis Stevens' dark psychodrama, A Wounded Fawn.
I've never thought of myself as a multi-hyphenate Renaissance man, but now I'm going to tell everybody I am.
How could you not? You were like an octopus across new media.
I'll take it. Hell yeah.
So, Josh, where did you grow up?
Yeah, we were just talking about, being East Coast boys. But I grew up for the most part in Woodstock, New York, snowy little artist town, not home to the actual concert. But yeah, that was my formative year playground.
Being a New England boy, I'm sure you fell in love with the fall and the seasons, but now you're out in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I was pretty freaked out about the idea of moving to a place that quote unquote didn't have seasons, but then you get here and you quickly, even as an East Coast kid, and I wonder if you feel the same way, you start to become the East Coast person so used to wearing the Patagonia and going out into, 20-degree weather frequently to being chilly when it's 50 or 60, 50 if we're lucky.
My blood has thinned to the point where it's like skim milk now. The slightest breeze will set my teeth to chattering.
Every year when it gets colder, every time the temperatures drop, and so, oh man, I'm gonna write a real Halloweeny delight, and then of course I just end up drinking too much coffee and getting self-conscious.
Throwing a little pumpkin spice, and I think it'll carry you through.
Amen.
So how formative was the sort of woodsy area for you, just in your play and your imagination, and the stories you wanted to tell growing up and continuing to this day?
Oh, it was everything. I mean, my cousin and I, who essentially grew up in the same kind of rustic farmhouse where I started making like home videos and such and exploring, like testing the limits further of my my horror obsession. We would kind of dare ourselves, see how far into the woods we could wander, but your imagination just like runs wild. I remember I used to put on a gun belt when I was a kid because I was just a child of the 80s. They used to make like gas metal guns. I know you remember. It's like, they're not the bright colored guns, but it felt like I was like really putting like my gun belt on.
Yeah, some real blues steel gunmetal. You want to screen accurate.
Absolutely screen accurate. Yeah. But you'd wander into the woods and pretend I was some like, monster hunter, or that I was like Chief Brody finding some, I guess, above ground shark thing or whatever. And it was super formative because, again, no phones. My first experience with technology was, and being obsessed with technology was the TV. But to be able to go to the woods and let your imagination run wild, it was everything.
I'm thinking about the way that the environment shaped your movies, Scare Me and Werewolves Within.
Yeah.
Obviously, isolation is a big part of horror, and nature, or man versus nature, is a primary genre of story conflict. But I just think about the way that those green blacks and that depth of field kind of wraps around your characters in those movies. Do you think you're going to continue to make movies in that area?
I'm so glad you've asked this. No one has really kind of dug in this specifically, but it lights me up because I'm so inspired by, the area is the Hudson Valley. And I'm so inspired by even, there are other filmmakers up there, specifically Larry Fessenden, whose film Wendigo was actually shot in the town of Phoenicia.
Josh, I was going to ask you if you'd seen Wendigo, but I was like, if he hasn't, that'll be a dead end. Never mind.
No, dude. My sister and I went to go see it, and we were both just so thrilled that we saw that he shot in the town of Phoenicia, which is where the entirety of the Werewolves Within town strip was was filmed. We had 3 or 4 overnights in downtown Phoenicia. And that was the same street where not only Larry would, had shot scenes from Wendigo, which was just so kind of thrilling to think about that sort of like small town legacy there, but it was also where I'd go get like pancakes with my parents. It was the least expensive area to shoot in. I had the most resources with buddies and my parents' house and, that type of stuff. That was where I shot the first films, almost just by necessity, and also just because it's just my heart and the way I think that like Bucks County and similar areas of Pennsylvania are probably reminiscent of that for Shyamalan. But werewolves, they talked about Canada, they talked about Budapest, and I said, what about the Hudson Valley? And I was sort of crossing my fingers and biting my lip. And they somehow went for it. We were able to shoot at the Spillian house. It's this incredible sort of bed and breakfast. And, to be able to go up there and film my second movie, a werewolf movie in upstate New York, not far from where I grew up, in the same woods where I fantasize about all things monsters and Halloween. I mean, that was just like probably the most self-actualized, I guess, I'll probably ever feel, unless I can go back there and shoot some kind of like genre TV show.
All right, confession time. I was worried that this whole podcast was going to turn into me gushing about Scare Me, which blew my fucking mind.
Oh, thank
I
you, man.
loved that movie. It was so awesome. So, first question, was that written for or during COVID lockdown conditions?
Everybody was kind of like, wow, this feels like a COVID movie. How'd you make this so quickly? I was like, nope, we made this 2018.
One of those overnight successes that take years and years and years to develop.
Yeah, truly.
Can you give a sort of log line for Scare Me, and then we'll dive into it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's been a while. It's basically two strangers end up trapped in a cabin telling scary stories during a winter storm, only for things to escalate when Fred realizes he's not nearly as good a storyteller as Fanny.
So much of the conflict between Fred and Fanny feels of the moment in terms of toxic fandom, #MeToo, entitlement. At one point, Fanny asks Fred if he's an incel. How much of that was floating around in 2018? How much of that is your experience being around other would-be writers, or just observing the general online conversation, Gamergate, things like that?
Oh my gosh, it's a wonderful question. I mean, to kind of take this in pieces, you have to remember 2018 was the year of Me Too. I mean, at the height of the Me Too movement, when all of my kind of film heroes were being sort of outed. I'd also been so eager at this crossroads in my life. I was so eager to jump into making a film of my own. And I was, at the kind of the dreadful realization that no one was going to spoon feed me the opportunity to do so. So I knew that I was going to make a film no matter what. That was the promise to myself. And I actually read the Duplass brothers book, Like Brothers, which is a great book. And that really kicked my ass into gear. Like, yes, you know what? We're going to make the $1,000 movie, which quickly became that. So I wrote this idea knowing that horror is often the most successful genre, the genre of financial return. I knew I wanted to make a genre of film, especially as a horror lover before I was a comedy lover. And with Me Too going on, and me being, frankly, the only man in my circle that was signal boosting the stories of women in my life who had experienced Me Too-esque situations or toxic power trips with men, I really became fascinated with and infuriated in the most kind of electric way by the dynamic of emasculated and thus toxic and even competitive men. And the idea of the competitive man just really, really excited me when it came to feeling emasculated in the shadow of a genius, and that genius being a woman. So I just started writing with very little description, just kind of this rat-a-tat dialogue between two characters meeting on a road, and then that turned into telling scary stories. And I knew that I wanted the kind of style gimmick to be this very, very specific thing, which the Duplasses talk about. And for me, that specific thing was like making noises and creating things out of space. And so that was going to be the style gimmick. But what the movie was really about was this kind of, of the moment sort of thing. To speak to the characters, my being a piece of the characters, my relationship with the characters and writers, I am both of those characters. I'm a little bit Fred. I'm a little bit Fanny. I'm selfish. I, was a young toxic man once who made shitty decisions. I've learned a lot. I've been lazy as a writer. I've been, overworked as a writer. I've been self-righteous as a, all these different things. So I was like, yeah, let's pile it all in here. And the fun thing about it was, the anthology element were all stories that, this is to get really meta, that I had in my head that I just couldn't get off the ground or that I hit a wall with. That were the results of true writer's block. It's like I wrote a story about a zombie infection that only affected women, couldn't crack it. That got thrown in the movie. I wanted to do a troll thing. We'll figure it out through it in the movie. I used to make up a story about a dog that was in a house, a ghost dog, just tried to hack that and just threw that in the movie. And then I think as soon as it was kind of ready and I sort of dangled the carrot to my producer of this thing not costing any money, that was when things were sort of off and running, especially since it was socially relevant.
It's fascinating to find out that you found this through dialogue first, because it is so stylistic and it is such a character piece. And it's so funny. Was it scary to commit yourself on film as this toxic, entitled person? I mean, obviously, it's a brilliant puncturing, literally, and takedown of that type of character. But fast forwarding to A Wounded Fawn, you don't want to be that guy, even though I'm sure there's a great demand for that guy as a antagonist in current cinema.
I mean, I'll just say, in regards to the Fred of it all, it was thrilling. It was super thrilling to go after, and I don't consider Fred a villain. I consider Fred extremely insecure to the point of toxic, especially under the influence of alcohol. I have a terrible relationship with being a third wheel, especially when there's, another male in the scenario and you're trying to kind of keep the attention or trying to out impress the female of the group, or really just the other friend of the group, ex-friend that you want to impress. And so that was a dynamic I was super just kind of excited to puncture. With Wounded Fawn, I was so thrilled to skewer a piece of shit veneer egoist. I mean, the amount of people I've met in my life, especially men, especially Caucasian mid-30s dudes, who are defined by their fancy car. Or I remember when the iPhone first came out, the men in my circle who'd bought the iPhone in their late 20s would whip it out, so let me just show you a quick picture, to a girl, and to be impressive. And I was just so grossed out by it and held on to my BlackBerry as long as I could.
A wounded phone.
Yeah, wounded. It's exactly, just with the terrible head injury. It's a BlackBerry with a open wound. And I don't know. I'm so turned off by those types of materialistic, insecure, toxic pieces. It's okay to be insecure, but when people just hide behind masks and hide behind nice clothes and hide behind cars, I see right through it. And I think as a comedian too, that's what you want to do. You want to push and poke and prod, pop the bubble. And Wounded Fawn and Scare Me to a degree is all about these men's egotistical bubbles getting popped. Fred's very different. Wounded Fawn's very extravagant in that way. So all in all, super thrilling. And I think, it's probably different for some actors. There are some actors that just don't want to play the kind of, gross and pathetic role. And I think it's exciting, especially as a comedian, because it's my kind of form of therapy. It's like, oh, let's bring this guy to the forefront and beat the shit out of him, because it's cathartic. I'm happy to play the punching bag to a degree. That's important and it's fun. I'm also, I'm one of those actors who are willing to not only play the part, but do something I think maybe some actors of, a larger pedigree or more famous pedigree are not as excited to do, which is face the public and talk about it after the fact. I love to have, I don't know about intellectual, I'm a pretty dense dude, but I love to at least converse about, these roles and what they mean to, especially women, especially in relationship to, today's world and such.
with your background in comedy and improv, how do you balance that with being a writer? Because I would say Scare Me is rock solid as a script and as a dense character piece. With a limited budget, I'm sure you didn't have all the time in the world to goof around on set. But you got the
Correct.
comedy
Yeah.
chops, you've got the improv, you've got Aya Cash and Chris Red there. Were there moments of improv, or as a writer slash director, did you have to be like, guys, sorry, we gotta make our shot list?
Oh, we had very little time to improv. And while I am extremely encouraging of, making the words your own and such, if anything, I pushed, there are so many different versions of, and I think you can find it on the DVD, or, if you purchase the film on VOD, I think you'll see all the extras. There's some deleted scenes and certainly some improv. I had Chris Red go off on different ways he could murder someone when he first, walked into the cabin, because it's Chris Red, you got to push that. And if Aya Cash wants to, improvise a line about like Zumba, like, yes, absolutely. But because we didn't have too much time, to your point, that is a tightly scripted piece for sure. So ultimately, I think we all knew we only had so much time. We would rehearse what we had to do. We just kind of knock it out. So I wasn't precious, and those guys came in super prepared. We had a pretty tight knit machine, even though it was like a terribly cursed set the first week, with storms. And there were, a crew member had to get fired, and, there was like terrible snowstorms, and Aya got sick, and we had, scheduling issues. It was kind of nonstop, which I think is just that kind of happy curse of, jumping as a filmmaker. But all the other stuff was kind of, it was groovy.
There's an old expression, nature abhors a vacuum. And I've always wanted to append that to nature abhors a movie.
Yeah, truly, there's always going to be something. A great producer will be ready for it. A great director will go, hey, there's a windstorm. Like, let's go shoot the windstorm. Let's go, let's go get these waves for this would make great B-roll, or, kind of whatever. So part of it is like, yeah, you want to do it safely and such, but you want to be kind of, you got to be nimble, because movies are living organisms. Both when as you're doing them, it's jazz, and in the edit, it's jazz. There's just stuff you got to go with. And nature will be the quick factor to make your movie jazz.
I'm reminded particularly of a shot in Wounded Fawn, that slow push into the woods at night.
Yeah.
And the sound of wind, and it's like you could just keep that rolling for like 10 minutes, and I would just be digging it. Okay, so comedy and horror, two great tastes that go great together, yet notoriously hard to land. So in your rather seasoned opinion, what would you say makes a good horror comedy, and what causes them to fail?
Well, I can point you in the direction of one of the most successful horror comedies I've seen in the past however long, which is Deadstream. If you haven't seen Deadstream, it's Joseph Winter and Vanessa Winter's found footage, basically Evil Dead movie, where a guy is live streaming his experience going through a haunted house. And it's so funny. And the comedy lands very, very well, but the scares land extremely well. And the gore is really good, and the creature effects are really good. And it's a great example of it, because even though I'd say that one falls maybe more on the buoyant side, in the way that Bruce Campbell's sort of comedic delivery is a bit buoyant, maybe a bit bigger, slightly farcical even, it just works for the context of the tone of that film. But it's hard to land often, I think, because there's of course the science of the scare, the jump scare, which is a thing. I'm still trying to crack it myself. But I think the secret, honestly, to great horror comedy is casting. If you have an actor that is playing terror for real, but is also inherently funny, like let's take Sam Richardson as an example. Sam is so inherently funny. He could read the ingredients on the back of a Yoo-hoo bottle and make it funny. And you also couldn't see him trying. It's effortless. You could not catch Sam trying to be funny. He just is. I'd say the same thing with Milana Weintraub, who plays Cecily. She has this really great kind of deadpan, almost like Aubrey Plaza adjacent kind of naturalism about her. That's just like, I'm just gonna say some stuff, or she can, she's a really good technical actor. She can just like do that well-timed eye roll, or well-timed like sniff that like just makes a line. That's when you're, I think, hyper successful.
It's interesting. I think they both live on tension and release, comedy and horror.
No, you're right so far.
However, comedy and horror are both subjective, and it must be like trying to hit a bullseye within a bullseye to make something that people find scary and funny.
You're never going to get it. Well, this is like with every movie. You're never going to satisfy everyone unless, maybe it's Jaws. You just can't hit kind of all sides of it. Although I'm sure there are people who watch Jaws, especially today, and go like, well, it looks fake. And also it might be too long and the characters are too chatty or whatever the fuck it is. You're never going to kind of get everyone stoked. Even with Marvel, the quote unquote reason why people are going to the theaters, like not everyone's stoked on Marvel. In fact, people have the most criticism about Marvel. With horror comedy, you're exactly right. You have to just be a really good barometer, a walking barometer for that's too much or that's not enough. And then you got to be willing to test it and listen to your test audience. It's great to test an audience. Why or test your film with an audience? Why not? You want to test it to be able to see like, oh shit, that validates what I thought was working. Where it's dangerous is where you still are standing by the fact that it's working, or the concept that it's working, but you might have a producer who's eager to put their thumbprint on it, which luckily I haven't had too nasty of an experience. But that I think is a danger for yes men and women in our industry who want to just do good by the powers that be, when you have to kind of be unflinching about what your gut's telling you. It's a really, really tricky thing, and I think I've got the upper hand to a degree, having made so many videos, having so much experience, having fallen down and fucked up with my sketch history in terms of the comedy, and just making videos that were so technically not totally there when I didn't quite know and have my technical skill set. It takes a while to kind of get there.
Speaking of producing, I would like to segue into Blood Relative real quick. You recently produced and appeared in Noah Segan's triple threat movie, Blood Relative. Can you give us a brief logline of that film?
Yeah, Blood Relatives is a Paper Moon-esque daddy-daughter vampire road trip movie where a Jewish vampire named Francis reunites with his estranged daughter and meets his estranged daughter Jane on the road, and they forge a relationship and create a trail of blood along the way.
Perfect. Spoken like a proud producer. Did you ever see Noah's movie Dead Girl?
I have not seen Dead Girl. He talked about Dead Girl, and I watched the trailer for it, and I was like, I have to.
It is intense. I still feel dirty.
Oh, man.
Dead Girl in
Wow.
2008.
But it's awesome. He's incredible in it. How did you come onto that project?
So this is so wild that this is the following question after my previous answer, because speaking of test audiences, we did these test audiences for Werewolves Within over Zoom, and I was able to like spy on them over Zoom. It's like an unregistered guest or whatever the function is, and so I could take notes and see how audiences were sort of reacting to various cuts and such. And Noah was one of the audience members for one of these feedback screenings because he knew the producers of Vanishing Angle. And I was like, holy shit, that's Ryan Johnson's dude. That guy's, I love that actor, kind of, starstruck in my own kind of nerdy actor way. And I got on the phone with him just to thank him and ask him some questions and pick his brain about working with Ryan and just working in really, hundreds of films or whatever, his history of acting. And we got to talking, and he said at some point that he really enjoyed Scare Me, and that he had a script that was kind of just as contained, and would I be interested in reading it? And I read it, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was, beautiful and funny, and it moved. And he said, would you be interested in producing it? And I said, I will co-produce this movie. I'm not a, paperwork producer, but I will connect and I will help you creatively get the thing there. And he agreed. And with Liao Naeem, our other producer, and Aaron Kuntz over at Paper Sheet Pictures, and some other folks, we were able to basically get the funding for this film from Shudder and get the thing through production and into film festivals, within a year. It's pretty rad.
Wow. Yeah, great cast in that one. Definitely gave me Near Dark vibes. I loved the sort of Demon Knight stripped down muscle cars and dirt roads. And,
yeah.
Everything is at dawn or dusk, and bringing in the family history, family trauma aspect of the drama, and then mixing that all up with a vampire story, I thought was a really fresh angle. I wonder if, that is the path forward from these somewhat tired CW Vampire Academy type stories, because the vampire mythos is so adaptable. And I feel like Blood Relative just goes to prove how anything can be a vampire story if you approach it with some emotional depth.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like why horror is a genre. I was thinking about this yesterday. There was a reviewer asking Travis and Stevens and Sarah Lind and I, what is it about horror that really draws us to it? And I think this could also be a decent answer, is that horror can be almost anything, and that's what's so exciting about the genre. It could be a family story, but a horror family story. It could be an adventure story, but a daddy-daughter road trip comedy, but with horror elements. And when a fresh idea is executed and is received well, it's so exciting because it continues to open the doors and kind of challenge our expectations and subvert expectations. I hope it's the path forward. I hope that people, want to see more. I think people's sensibilities are just, far fresher than they once were. This is why I think a film like Wounded Fawn, just conversely, and Blood Relatives are both kind of hitting on all sides of the palette in exciting ways, because there's a freshness to it. It's not, so derivative, or what's derivative is just sort of familiar. That's the way in. But then it's like, yeah, now we're going to subvert it. Now we're going to flip it on its head.
That's a good segue into Wounded Fawn. It seems like A Wounded Fawn is trading in some of the conventions of Grindhouse or Giallo. Was it shot on film, or was that just a filter you guys added later?
It was shot on glorious 16 millimeter film by Kasusha Genenfeld, our DP. Yeah, and that was Travis's mandate. It's actually easy. You just kind of budget your film cartridges per day. Shoot on whatever 4 or 5 a day, and you're good. And each cartridge is like 11 minutes. So what's exciting about it is, you got to rehearse. You got to get it right, because every foot is, many, many dollars.
Yeah, and there's so much camera crossing and, jump scares, as we talked about earlier, and so much staging. I imagine there must have been a lot of pressure to hit your marks if you're not shooting on digital.
There was a little bit of it, but, we had time on this one. It was actually a luxurious schedule. I don't know how they made it work, but it was something like a month. It was something like 28 days, most of which were night shoots, but we had time to rehearse. And I think too, it's like Sarah and I are really good. We're really good at hitting our marks. Sarah's got a lot of experience. I've been able to, again, as I was saying, especially with College Humor in my last 2 films, I've had a lot of experience directing other actors to hit certain marks, certain tableau shots. And Travis is a bespoke shot director, and he knew that was the value of film. You couldn't just let's grab the whole scene in a wide and then come in and grab the whole scene in a close up, and then we'll flip and do yours. It was, no, this moment is going to be this angle, and then this moment's going to be this angle, and this line is going to be right here. That was the whole movie.
Nerd question. What is that claw weapon that your character Bruce has?
Not nerdy at all. It's exciting. It is called a Bagnak, and it is I believe it's a weapon that originated in India many, many years ago as an assassin's tool used to kill people and blame the death on a tiger or a wild animal, as opposed to, it couldn't have possibly been a person who came in here and assassinated me. It was a tiger who came in my tent and mauled this poor person. And Travis really phrased this well the other day. He was like, Bruce is so up his own ass. He would want to make sure I of course I use a Bob knock. I'm not like all those other slashers who kill with a butcher knife or kill with a machete. I have to have this, exotic weapon out, this originated from India.
It also gives him, at least symbolically, some cover from being complicit in the crime. The very nature of that weapon is to shift blame, and Bruce, his whole psychology seems to be on some level shifting blame for the terrible things.
Yeah. Wow, that's so well said. That's a very, very astute observation. That's bang on. I totally agree with that. I haven't thought about it that way, but I agree.
So the Calvin and Hobbes question. What was real? What was psychological? So when you're reading Calvin and Hobbes, you see a boy carrying around a stuffed tiger, and then when nobody's looking, you've got this giant tiger padding along with them. And I'd always be looking through my Calvin and Hobbes collections, and I'm like, there are tiger footprints in the snow, and there's no one around. So that proved there's some kind of external reality to this tiger.
Yeah.
Now, in A Wounded Fawn, the Furies are manifesting to Meredith before anyone is harmed. And there are things happening when Bruce is off screen. So it can't be things that he's imagining. we can play with what's real, what's supernatural, what is psychological. But for me, the biggest question is, if the Furies are real in any way, is the Red Owl in Bruce also real?
We all believe in a line. I can't remember if Sarah might slightly disagree, but we all may be aligned on this. The Red Owl is it's a cover and an excuse and a defense and a deflection. He is in full control, and it is a masturbatory fantasy. And he's been in control kind of from the get-go. And I don't know, at least that was the way I was playing him, was, that kind of, that Jack Torrance-esque sort of a wink, like, I'm not all there, and I know I'm not all there, and I know I'm not all there, but I'm going to say that I'm all there, and then I'm all good. Let's get in the car and drive home. You have nothing to be afraid of when it's just like fully on display and can't hide anymore after the thing is quote-unquote been taken out of his head.
During this whole process, we're diving into Bruce's psyche, or at least his id, but not his backstory. We get some glimpses of backstory, a few passing references to losing his parents at an early age. How much of Bruce's backstory was discussed with the director, or did you, as an actor, have to develop your own sort of story Bible for him?
I didn't have to develop my own story Bible, but Travis, one of his first emails to me once my contract was kind of locked in and we were ready to go was just a series of questions asking me what I thought his background was. But Travis's inquiries were sort of guiding towards and alluding towards abuse, simply because it was mentioned in the script. I think that was, by nature of the fact that it was alluded to in the script, just in the car. It's such a powerful moment. I think, Sarah's character asked Bruce, about his folks, and it's this kind of like loaded moment.
The car drives through a tunnel, and it gets literally so dark and claustrophobic in that moment, and then they zoom out into the sunshine and he smiles, and I was like, oh, fucking nailed it. It was so good.
Yeah, I agree. And so I never dug in too much to what that was. Yeah, it's helpful for me. It's probably not helpful for many other actors, probably more professional actors, to kind of leave it open to interpretation even to themselves, but I didn't really need to define it. I just knew that something bad happened, and it was sort of these amorphous kind of dreamlike images in my head. Whether, yes, it was probably abuse and probably ironically a head wound in early age, but that he was very likely responsible for killing his own parents, and then deflecting that death onto perhaps something else. You can kind of perhaps link the Bognock to it. But I never defined it. I just knew that he was a bad dude and he was wearing a mask. He was hiding behind this kind of upper class aristocratic veneer.
Okay, a few quick Halloween questions. Are there any local legends from where you grew up? Any cryptids or any ghost stories that always titillated you?
You would think that in the Hudson Valley, and especially in our part of town, my folks are still in the house I grew up in, this farmhouse on a mountain, that there would be cryptids, relevant ones to that area, but there really weren't. I mean, the only ghost stories were that of in our actual house, where we were all convinced that my mother's father was very present and was a benevolent force. And, my mom would often talk about it. I've seen him, I saw him in the middle of the night, and he only, was like looking after us. And that's still kind of a disquieting and uncomfortable, quote unquote, fact or image or, suggestion from your own mother to make, that there's a ghost in the house, and that's the source of the, creaky pipes and creaky floor sounds you're hearing when you're coming home from school. And I was a latchkey kid for, a bit of my middle school, high school experience. So it was a bit unsettling, but I remember making one up with my cousin. We called him Wolfula. We were like, oh, there's this there's this blood-sucking wolf, which I probably should, collect the IP from at some point. Ask my cousin to go in on it with me. We're just like, oh, Wolfula is definitely out there.
I'm surprised that didn't make an appearance and scare me.
I know. I think that was as far as I went, was just the werewolf proper, but I absolutely should have.
What was your best Halloween that you can remember?
Oh man, awesome question. I think the best one I remember, honestly, and maybe this is kind of, I wouldn't even want to say it's sad. I'll say it was actually great. I made my own haunted house in a back bedroom with my little cousin, with Dan, and we filled it with cobwebs and like trinkets and rubber bats and rubber spiders and a strobe light and a cassette tape of haunted house sounds and such. And it was just like a bedroom. I mean, you walk in the door and it's just dark, but you can see everything. It was so poorly constructed, but there was something so awesome. I remember about like building it with my cousin, having all the like toys and trinkets to kind of fill it up and get like, I don't know, creative, and having my parents just be kind of like down to let us destroy the room. And then, assembling some hodgepodge makeup costume. That was great. That was like oddly one of the most memorable ones, I'd say.
Well, Josh, you're still doing it. You're still living that dream.
Yeah, exactly right. Chasing my childhood. I think that's what we're all doing. Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Thank you for saying so.
All right, well, that's probably a good note to end on as any. Can you say anything about your next projects?
Yeah, sure. I can tease at least that I'm working on a horror comedy with Michael Kennedy, who wrote Freaky, Blumhouse's Freaky, that came out I think it
Hell
was
yeah.
last year. I absolutely love, and I'm also working on a really unnerving and yet blackly funny science fiction kind of Invasion of the Body Snatchers-esque story from a writer named Aaron Horowitz, who did The Cleansing Hour, and it's just one of the best scripts I've read in some time. So those are the two that are sort of neck and neck, but there's always other stuff kind of floating around. It's such a weird circus life we have. You never kind of know when something's just going to kind of come out of the blue and drop in your lap that's actually financed and have you kind of ready to go. But it's all kinds of hustle on this end. So when I'm not waiting by the phone for those kind of things to get their financing, I'm getting a graphic novel together. I have one releasing next year called Darla, my first one. It's kind of a twisted sort of nod to my love of Tales from the Crypt and all things Stephen King.
Awesome. Oh, okay, that's fantastic. Is there a particular site or link where you'd like people to check up on you and follow your stuff?
Yeah, you can check me out at josh'smindhouse.com, all one word. And that's where I just put up all the latest and greatest news.
This was so great. Thank you for being so generous with your time.
My pleasure, man. Such great questions, Jeff. I really, really appreciate it. It's refreshing.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and follow. We're now on YouTube. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.